I'm Allison Watt, and today I'd like to introduce you to the artist Yvonne Vander Kooi. Yvonne works at the gallery, the Nanaimo Art Gallery, where I live, and I've known her for several years now, at least 10 years, Yvonne.
I
Yeah,
think
and
at least.
worked with and for you. And I admire her as an artist and as a person. She's a very committed artist and teacher as well, and works so well with the public and young people especially. So she's really on the front lines of bringing art to the grassroots. And I thought you'd be inspired by our chat. So welcome, Yvonne.
Thank you. Thanks, Allison.
Today she's in her own studio.
Yeah.
And we're going to go right into the images of some of her work, and we'll have a chat about her own story as an artist, and then we'll have a longer discussion after looking at the images. Okay, so I'm starting here with your studio.
There you
Kind of
are.
redundant
Wow.
because there you are in your studio, and here is your
Yeah.
studio. And I'm really happy to see how messy it is. No, I hope that doesn't offend you. But
No, I was actually thinking about that today because I generally work in quite a lot of chaos, which I know, that's not the case for every artist, but it is for me.
that's great to hear that. I fluctuate. Like I'll work in a lot of chaos for a while, and then all of a sudden I'll just have to
Yeah.
put everything away and even
Oh yeah, you have to do that.
even vacuum.
It's interesting. This is the first one you've shown. It's probably the oldest one that I've sent you. I did it a number of years ago. It was part of a series of primarily portraits, really loose, kind of gestural portraiture that I did when I was working with children in an elementary school, and we were doing a lot of art classes and creating a mural project. And so, I guess I would say my teaching practice informs my art practice and vice versa. Kids, and so I'm so touched by, by my experiences with them, and so often took a lot of photos, and I often reference photos in my work. So in this series, I did reference a number of photos that I took of the children. And some photos just have a kind of resonance that interests me, and really they're just a starting point. So what's important to me is that I don't just stay there. It's not just about a mimetic response. That encourages me to push into the material, the acrylic paint, and kind of pushing and exploring the boundaries of what that material can do for me on a surface. So yeah, that's an example of one of those. And it's like a combination of like fat and lean paint, so lots of different like scraping and thick, and then really watery, almost watercolor-like effects. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like how you do that in your work. It's interesting to hear acrylic described as fat and lean, because usually I think of that as applied to acrylic versus oil, but of course it also is true with acrylics, depending on how much you water it down, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and then this one is a part of a larger series. And actually this series about family and immigration and war in my family is still going on. I feel like I'm continuing to sort of play with those old black and white photos, those photos that kind of represent my family history on both my mom and my dad's side. And, I wonder if part of that is because I'm so far away, and it's a way for me to connect with them in the moment.
Most of your relatives are in the Netherlands, right?
Yeah, my mom and dad are back in Toronto, but they're from Holland, and my father's from Indonesia.
Right.
So they immigrated shortly after the war, and they met here in Canada, and sort of built their life. And so I feel like I've gone like back to, like, this is my father's mom. for instance, holding him or his brother, I'm not sure. The photograph was a very tiny black and white photograph, and I just thought it was so beautiful. It was taken in Indonesia, and this was just before World War II. It's especially poignant, I think, for me and my father and my family, because she passed away. She died in the war at the age of 31 or 32, and she had 5 children by then. And so, you know, there's a lot of things, a lot of history there that I'm unaware of. And I think this is, you know, a way to connect and play with the paint as well. So I feel like, you know, there's 2 things going on. Like one thing that I'm excited about with art, especially these days, contemporary kind of thinking, is like, you know, what are some of the ideas or the backstories behind what I'm doing, and how am I going to play with the material?
Right. Yeah. Because the material is, you can't realize it without the collaboration of the material.
That's right.
And I am curious about that, you know, voyage for you from the tiny image into the big, because some of these are big in this series, right? Like very large. I saw
Up
the
to 6
show.
feet. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the show a couple of years ago, and it was a fantastic show of your family paintings. Wow, sad story about your grandmother.
Yeah, lots of sort of sad and tragic circumstances at that time for so many, right? There's so many displaced, and people put in internment camps and sort of struggling through, you know, they were part of a colonial structure in Indonesia that, you know, my father was born into. So, you know, these are complicated histories, you know. And I think what I do when I look at these photos is sometimes I fill in the gaps, and I think that's part of the artist's imagination, is filling in those gaps and being playful and imaginative with that, or imagining you know, other narratives or new narratives possibly. Yeah, so that's I guess part of my process.
Right. And would it be right to say that you are a storyteller in your art usually? I mean, not all your images, but maybe because you're so you do work
Yeah,
with
the
figures so
figurative.
much.
Yeah, I think narrative painting has become more and more important to me. You know, this idea of telling a story through narrative in images, a tableau of sorts. You know, right away when you said that, I think about the artist this past week who passed away. She was UK, born in Portugal. What was her name? Paula Rego. And you know, as a female painter, I think she's 86. She was 86. She passed away, and she's just astounding. But her work also embraces storytelling through imagery, and she creates huge, large tableau paintings, large format, and often references historical paintings in that way. But then like completely upends them and inserts her own kind of narrative, whether it's you know, really controversial or edgy or uncomfortable, but she sticks that in there, and it's just fascinating and big. You know, she's an amazing artist.
We'll drop that in the notes. Is it Rego?
Yes, Paula Rego.
Yeah, we'll drop that in the notes. This one is, I really love this one. I love the tension between the opacity and transparency in this one, but also the figure is very evocative.
Yeah, that's my father's mother as well. Yeah, this one, you're right, it does have a lot of play, right, between those 2 kinds of things. I had a lot of fun really like holding back. Like I feel like in some ways what this series kind of taught me was to sort of slow down and really think about my next move. So I'm not like, furiously painting, like a whirling dervish in the studio or something. I tend to, even more and more, I find as I get older, I just find my work is really slowing down, and it's shifting and it's changing. And I'm kind of going with that. Like, it's okay.
You think
Sometimes,
it's because you know more your language as an artist now?
yeah. I
So you're
mean,
not searching so much?
possibly, or just feeling more comfortable, not always doing, like not always putting the brush or something on the canvas, but pulling back. Like I've had a talk about this with another artist, and we sort of refer to it as informed intuition, where
That's funny, because that's a term I've always
yes, that's right. We talked about that. I
yeah.
remember. Yeah. And you mentioned it as well. And it's funny that we both have been thinking about that. But, this idea of like really learning, actively learning, pursuing the material, figuring out what it can do, and letting that inform you, but also a kind of intuitive sense. And I think our intuition changes. So as we grow and the more we learn, it's more of an informed intuition as opposed to a childlike one. And so I think that's what I strive to do here a little bit. This piece actually, and another one that I sent you, I'm quite excited. It got accepted into the public gallery in Prince George, Two Rivers. And it's going to be part of a group show in August, themed on immigration.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So this one is part of that series too.
Yeah. That's another one. It's called Moeder, which is Dutch for mother, or Moeder and Kinderen, I think, mother and children. And again, here I was really experimenting on different surfaces. So this isn't canvas or panel. It's a kind of polymer. It's like a plastic sheeting almost. And I actually forget what it's called. I picked it up at Industrial Plastics, but it has enough of a surface kind of texture, I guess, to hold the paint. But it treats it like Yupo. So it's like a 4x4 foot sheet and mostly flat. I worked on this. And so a lot of pooling of water and experimenting that way.
Yeah, you can see that effect up here. It's great in a large format. Like we often see this technique in watercolor or acrylics on Yupo, but it was great to see this on such a large scale.
Yeah.
Really intriguing. Yeah.
And there's a detail. That one that's part of the Bathers, which is also a sort of larger tableau, of figures by the river. My father is the child with his head turned towards his mom.
This child here.
Yeah, right there. And then his little sister and his brother. My grandmother had 2 more children before she passed away. And then his father also was killed in the war in Indonesia. So a lot of these, well, this picture in particular was just very, I guess, resonant for me, or it really drew me in. And I think too, just the touching kind of, the family together, that was such a short-lived experience for all of them. So I guess I'm honoring that in some way by putting it down for him, and for me too.
Right.
That one, it's got a long title. I think I forget what the title is, but I remember showing the photograph to my father, and he said, "Oh, that's the last time I saw him." And that's his father when he went off into the jungle. And he worked in the underground, in the Dutch underground against the Japanese forces at the time. And so that picture too I thought was really powerful. You could hardly see it. It was literally like, 2 inches by 2 inches square. But, I expanded it to 6 by 6 feet, and played with it and made all kinds of interpretations. And as I created the work, I'm pretty sure I created some new narratives. Someone told me one time when I was doing a critique, that my work is about slippage. And I at first I was like, I couldn't quite understand what they meant. And I thought about it for a while, and I talked about it to my son one time. And in some ways it really is, especially when it pertains to memory, this idea that memory is full of like slippage holes,
Right.
nothing is fixed. It's very transient, things change, stories get told that aren't accurate, memory is inaccurate. And I kind of feel like memory and imagination are bedfellows, really.
Definitely.
So like where imagination might end, or where the memory ends, maybe the imagination begins.
But I also think that there's an emotional content there, that the imagination creates the memory that it wants. Right.
That's true. Yeah.
But this is such a beautiful photo, a beautiful painting, like just physically really beautiful, with all the interesting interactions with the patterning, and yet such a sad photo, like such a somber family history. So he was killed when on his mission, his last.
Yeah, he was murdered by the Japanese in a mock trial, a public trial, along with 10 other Dutch underground officers. But and it's sort of funny when I think about, I mean, it's not a funny story, it's not what I mean to say, but when I'm thinking about, how the work gets created and the processes that go into it, and the thinking, and the sort of even the unconscious sort of plays a role. And the tree, for instance, in the background, that's all taped shapes. And for some reason, and I know why, but they needed to be sharp, they needed to be dangerous looking. And they needed to sort of be a part of this portrait of my grandfather, who was brutally murdered. So I think, so there's a connection to, I guess, that story, where, the tree, or the leaves in the tree somehow become, the
weapons.
Weapons, literally. Like there's silver edge taping and triangular forms on top of the organic. I mean, that was also an aesthetic decision, or whatever you want to call it, because I felt like the composition was boring and it needed a shift, right?
But this is where the unconscious works in art, right? Which is not just painting, but writing too, where the subconscious, like you say, slips in.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the things that keeps me going back
to
creative work.
So
this is the painting where the detail that we looked at was from right here. Here was the detail, right?
And also a fairly ominous kind of photograph. I don't know who the two individuals are on the left, these two men smoking their cigars, fairly menacing. I don't know, they just kind of look like some kind of oppressive force or colonial force or something, I'm not sure. But the interesting thing is, when I was studying the photograph and painting, and again, this is large, this is 5 by 5 feet, I noticed in the background these figures in the photo.
These here.
And again, I'm like, so who are those? Who are they? And right away I knew who they were. They were the Javanese, the native Indonesian people, often worked for the Dutch families, either as servants or as nannies. And so they're waiting in the background, and they're waiting to take care of the children, and they're staying back, and they're out of the photo, or just out of the photo. And so that interested me too, you know, and finding and trying to figure out a way to kind of narrate that in the painting in a way that, you know, wasn't obvious in terms of me trying to right some wrong, but, you know, making sure that they were there,
Right.
present.
No, I think that it is a great balance that you caught there. They're kind of screened and slightly hidden, and they're
Mhm.
there, but they're
And the pink.
just barely there. Yeah, I love that one.
This one also is a part of the series. This is when my father was in Holland as a young man, and he had joined the Air Force. And I think in Holland at the time, the service was mandatory. They had to do 2 years. Everyone had to do 2 years. Post-war, it was just on everyone's mind, I guess. But I think this is one of my favorites. It's gone, it's sold, and that's fabulous. But I do, you know, I don't mind getting rid of work and selling it, but this one I rather miss. It's about, I think it's 4x4. And I just had, again, this is a good example of imagination and maybe not so much memory, but referencing this photograph and then having fun with it and kind of moving into a Rococo style, you know, approach with these soldiers. They literally did have plants and camouflage on their helmets, like as if they, you know, they were practicing, you know, being camouflaged in the bush or on the ground. And then they had this photo taken of the 5 of them with their bayonets and their rifles. And I just thought, I'm going to take that greenery and I'm going to amp it up 100%.
Yeah,
So
it's a great painting. I love this painting.
yeah,
It's mysterious, and it's got a lot of tension because of that decorative element, but then the weapons as well. So it really draws, like, as a viewer, I want to know what the story is.
right.
So if I was seeing this in a gallery, I'd go directly to the
Right.
title. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and also, I mean, just from a craft point of view, it's just beautifully rendered.
Oh, thank you. It took a long time
I
to
bet.
paint that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's another one. This is my mom and myself. It's called Breaking Bread. And again, a lot of play and pulling of paint. That strip in the background there, those are food stamps on the wall that I sort of repainted. I actually have actual food stamps in my studio from wartime. And you know, it was this system that the Germans had ordered the Dutch to put in place just around rations, food rationing, a food distribution system. And it's in there, you know, and then my mom is there. This is a picnic, obviously much later, but I know that my family we all carry these experiences forward and they play out in different ways. And, you know, aside from the normal preoccupation that a mother would have with feeding their child, you know, I do believe that that is something that is even more sort of intensely felt by my mom because of the war.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think the whole generation.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Well, at least the Europeans, maybe not the North Americans,
yeah,
but that there was still resonance from the Depression too, you know, in my
yeah,
grandparents' lives, even though they were Canadian.
yeah.
Um, Very different
And
relationship.
I guess what I would say too about these paintings, like I realize as I speak that I'm sharing kind of some of the personal narratives that are that go along with them. But my hope, I guess, is that you know, people can approach this work and have their own experiences of it, whether or not they know the backstory. I'm not sure that's always important, but I think, you know, or I hope anyway that there's some access there for folks, and there's a bit of, universality to some of what's going on.
Yeah, well, I think no, yeah, I mean, this is the thing about painting. It's not like writing. We don't expect a prosaic
Right.
experience when we see something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, I mean, personally, I don't have, I don't feel any barrier to looking at the work because it's your personal story. I just find it really
Right.
compelling work. Well,
Mm-hmm.
here's some of the details of that floral one.
Yeah. And then the taped silver bayonets.
Right.
Contrast there. Yeah.
Yeah. And this must be a detail. Oh, that's the one with you and your mother and breaking
Yeah.
bread.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have popped these in order. I didn't look at them carefully enough.
Oh,
But
that's okay.
anyway,
That's
it's
right. Yeah, just a close up. I wanted to sort of show some of the technical, more formal aspects of the painting.
Mhm.
So the glass being those taped ridges,
right.
paint, yeah, thin and thick.
Yeah, you can really see in this one all of the layers,
Yeah,
all of the thin layers.
yeah. And that's also a detail of the mother and children in the water.
Mhm.
And again, like that, you know, thick, thin, and really playing with pigment and with the water as the medium. So if you notice in the top right, you know, where her breast and bathing suit is, the way that the pigment pooled was just gorgeous. And that's a chemical, you know, kind of happening response. That's what happens with that particular pigment when it's in water and then it dries. So a lot of this work, like, I've had to evaporate. It didn't absorb in. And so the next day I would discover, you know, what happened on the surface.
Fun. Yeah.
Which is
this is the one on the plastic sheet, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's on a polymer, a Yupo-like paper. Yeah.
What do they use it for? Like, why are they selling it at the plastic
I
store?
think it's signboard. It's some kind of exterior signboard. And they told me that, you know, it was very durable and it would take paint well. And I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. Because I know, you know, a lot of plastics don't. You know, Plexi does, this stuff does. I really wish I can remember what it was called, but
because the polyethylene, it just peels off, right? Once it
that's
dries,
right. Yeah, polyethylene, it doesn't at all. So the thing that was hard that I discovered about this is that because I was working on these sort of large wobbly sheets of plastic, I had to find a way to mount them and frame them, and that became quite costly. So I ended up going back to canvas or panel and using molding paste, which has marble dust in it. And so I put a pigment in the molding paste, and I would spread that over the entire surface so that, again, you get that kind of floating effects with the paint. It doesn't absorb, it floats and it evaporates.
Well, so you treated the plastic.
I know, canvas. Like, I stopped using the plastic just because it was quite expensive to frame. And then to get the same effects with canvas or panel, I have to use, you know, the molding paste.
Is it a molding paste or a modeling paste, and what's the difference exactly?
It's molding paste. I have it here in the studio, and it's a golden product.
Yeah.
And no, it's not modeling. But it just, because it has marble dust in it, apparently the marble dust is what makes it very, very smooth, like a plastic-like surface. So again, the paints won't absorb. And it's not light molding paste, it's just the regular molding paste. So I know there's different kinds.
Right. Yeah.
You have to get the one with marble dust in it.
Very cool. Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
This one's more recent. It's at Gallery Merrick in Victoria. I think it's going to be part of my show in July. And again, that was, you know, it is family based, but much looser, I think. Had a lot of fun just like painting the figure really big and loose, and then holding the child. And then I actually taped and covered the entire figure like a silhouette. And I played with the background. So I pulled and scraped paint. So that's why you can see sort of a little bit, it's hard to see maybe in this photo, but cut edges. So the background is almost like a completely separate, painting. Yeah. And so that edge follows the figure and the child and all the way through the painting. And so it's kind of exciting because I felt like I could have done more in the background. And then when I took off all of the tape and the covering of the silhouette, then I could sort of see how that experimentation played out. I'd like to do more of that.
That's good. That's a nice feeling to be able to place in your work where you want to do more.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, that's just another example of a loose, watery, it's called mouth. You know, I've done so many of these, and some of them just are quite boring and just maybe experimental, but I rather like the way this one turned out in terms of the portrait and the bleeding of colors and water. And that, I believe, is on Yupo.
Cool.
That's part of a botanical series that I did, which you're familiar with.
I am.
And those are, I think, pelargoniums, I think, a type of, anyway, a lot of these botanicals were inspired by this this Victorian book that I had that was just, it was called Greenhouse Favorites, and it was full of illustrations, gorgeously painted illustrations of sort of gorgeous flowers and of botanicals, and lots of writing about it. It was just a fascinating read. And actually even more fascinating, I thought, were the paintings. And I presumed, and I think correctly, that most of the artists that painted these were women, anonymous women. They weren't even credited with the work. So, because we're talking late 1800s here. And I just thought the work was sort of unusual. Like it had a kind of strange quality. It wasn't your sort of typical painted botanical. And so that was my starting point, not a photograph, you know, not a flower from life, but their work, these women's work from the late 19th century. And then
the books would be prints, and then the women would do the painting part.
Say that again?
The images would be prints, and then the women would fill in the painting. Is that right?
Oh, is that right? Was that?
I don't know. I'm wondering.
I don't think so. I think they were all hand done.
Oh, wow.
Completely from observation. But yeah, they just had, and they were all, some of them, they're all so different. You could tell there was different artists involved. And so I just took them a little bit further. And again, imagination here, you know, adding to the image making, just to sort of play and make it more interesting, and not just a mimetic response to their work, but just had a lot of fun with it because it created some unusual forms.
Yeah, I love this series. I own a couple of them.
So nice. Yeah, and then this one has a long Latin name, some, you know, gorgeously exotic plant. I don't know what it is, but I loved it.
Yeah. Orchid.
Yeah.
Oh, this is one I haven't seen.
Oh, okay. Actually, that was purchased locally by a friend of mine just recently at the Open Studio event that I had. But it's partridge. It's part of the bestiary series that I did, similar to like the botanicals. But again, I bought and found all kinds of bestiaries, and these books are just, you know, medieval kind of accountings of animals, and a lot of kind of moralizing going on.
Right.
Of course, Christendom manages to moralize the natural world somehow. And so there's like this incredible story about this partridge and what it means. And so I did about, I don't know, 15 or 20 paintings loosely based on some of these images from the bestiary that were drawn by medieval artists. And, you know, again, and they too combined imagination, very little observation, maybe notes from an explorer or a drawing, which is why you saw so many fantastical creatures in those bestiaries.
Because they weren't really based on real observation
No,
of the natural world.
no.
What rich material to work with. And I
Yeah,
think
it's a lot of fun.
that's the last image.
Okay.
Unless there's more you want to say about that.
No, I
Okay.
think that's good.
Where are those paintings? Where are those bestiary paintings?
Some of them are in my house. Some of them sold. And yes, and I think a few of them are at Gallery Merrick.
I'll drop a link to Gallery Merrick. And what's the
Yes,
dates of your show there?
July 8th, Friday night, July 8th is the opening. And I'm working on stuff, as you can see from that first studio shot. That's all works in progress. I've got large 5x5 and 6 feet work, as well as, smaller pieces as well.
And how long is the show up for?
It's a group show. It's up for 2 weeks, starting July 8th. And I'm exhibiting with Donovan Rose and Tracy Bulcha from Toronto area. And Donovan's from Duncan. And he's actually runs the OO Gallery with his partner.
Oh, right. Great. Okay. Well, I'll put that in the feed. So let's have a little chat about more about you. Can you sort of tell me about, I guess you might call it the path to, how did you become an artist?
That's such a big question.
Were you always an artist? Were you a kid that always drew?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember painting in kindergarten at the easel and just loving it. I was thinking about that question today, and I've had always, since I was little, an interest in kind of creative people and what they're doing and what they're making, whether it's music or writing or drawing or batik or ceramics. I'm not sure why, but I was always drawn to people who were doing those things, and I really admired them. So I think obviously that's what took me there. In university, I actually studied the sciences, like kind of pre-med courses. And
I didn't know that about you. I love these talks. I find out things that I don't know about people. People I've known for a while.
It did not last long, Allison. I enjoyed the sciences a lot, but I think it was primarily, I was pushed into that by my parents, because I think they were worried that, as an artist, how does one manage to survive? What kind of job can you have? You could be a nurse or a doctor or something. But I went back to fine arts, as my major, and studied that, and just, continued to do that. I think another significant event, was becoming a mom, to believe it or not. I think I had all the time in the world as a young person and as a young adult, and exploring the world and having loads of fun. And then, but I think, having kids just kind of, I don't know, maybe it had something to do with time shrinking, or feeling like I wanted that time back, and what do I really want to do when I get my time. And so it actually helped me really focus my energies and my desire, I guess, to do that, to go back to painting.
That's interesting to hear. I sort of had an opposite experience. I started university doing mainly fine arts, and then I switched to sciences, did a degree in biology, and eventually started a master's in botany. And then around the same time, started having children. And I had the same feeling, like, what do I really want to do with the time that I have? Because obviously a big part of it is going to be the children. That wasn't in question. And then I thought, well, I only have an X amount of time other than that. What do I really want to fill it with? And then because I had a lot of solitary time at home. I mean, when the kids weren't awake, then I started, I dropped my science life,
Right.
at least the academic part, and started painting more.
Yeah.
I was already painting, so that's interesting.
Yeah. It's a significant time, I think, right? It does force you to really think about what you want.
Your time, yeah.
Yeah.
So was
Mhm.
there an event or a person that sort of changed your path, a major mentor?
I mean, I think always female artists, like even now I'm so drawn to, and not just female artists, but definitely um, leaning in that direction a little bit more, like people like Helen Frankenthaler. I'm just, she blows my mind. I would love to explore her work more. Um, you know, really interested in how she integrated printmaking and painting in her work. A lot of the artists from the abstract expressionistic period, like post-war period, are artists that I admire, like the old greats from that time. But I think, now they certainly interest me, but I'm also really paying attention to what contemporary artists are doing now, like the younger generation. I mean,
Mm,
social media is full of it. So
yeah, incredible.
I know it's like nuts. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's too much and you just have to shut it down and do your thing.
right.
But I'm just really excited by what I see out there in terms of painting
Yeah, me
and,
too.
what people are producing. It's really exciting and inspiring, to learn.
Totally. Yeah. Um, what was I going to ask you? Is there something that you haven't done yet? Something that's kind of an ambition, a big ambition you still feel like you have to crack open?
Yes.
What?
Yes. Well, I just sort of mentioned it, integrating printmaking techniques on the canvas with paint,
Mm,
and also ceramics, hand building though, more sculpture.
me too.
Yes,
So much.
so
Yeah.
much. I just don't know how I'm going to fit it all in, but I'm going to.
Yeah.
Um, I did that when I was in art school,
Yeah.
and I did a lot of hand building, not on the wheel. I was terrible with the wheel. Everything flew off. But I love the hand building. I love the coil and the slab. And so I
Mhm.
kind of want to somehow connect those things, printmaking, um, working with clay and image painting. Yeah.
I'm working on a painting right now and I used jelly print on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe you can share some of your techniques. I've tried it. It's not worked super well on the canvas surface, but we should talk.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I just tried it for the first time. It's
Okay.
just
Yeah.
parallel stories going on here. Yeah, no, it was, I could see that it could be improved from how I used it, but I was kind of excited because it's another kind of texture, very different from what you can get
And it's
from the
lovely
brush or
and
transfer.
flat. It's got that printmaking quality, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
exciting.
And you can mask it too. Like what I like to do with the jelly print is mask it so you don't always just get a,
A square.
yeah. So
Okay.
throw some cut masks on it and so you
Yeah.
can play with the shapes that are coming off it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What is your perfect day?
Well, in here in the studio, maybe it would be one of a number of consecutive days that I had or something
Yeah.
where I get to be here uninterrupted and just work and play around and experiment. I would love it if it was sunny and warm and I could go in the garden and then come back in and take my breaks that way.
I know that's special.
The weather
Well,
seems,
I know you have a really, really busy work life. So I
I
can
do.
imagine with a lot of people moving in and out of your workspace and working with the young artists that you've done so much for in that education department at
Yeah,
the gallery.
I really love that job too. It's 4 days a week. It's almost full time, so it's keeps me hopping. And I guess I would say too, in terms of you know inspiration or you know an event or something that really informed me or inspired me is the gallery actually, and a lot of the contemporary exhibitions and wonderful artists that I get exposed to, and I get to bring them in and work with them, and they teach some of the programs that I put together, and I just learned a lot from my experience there.
Yeah, that's such a rich environment to work in.
Mhm.
And do you have any advice for artists,
Well, it would
young
be
or old?
it would be the same advice I'd give to myself, which
Yes.
would be, I think, practice, experiment, practice, be open to trying new things, be open to how things are changing in the contemporary scene. I can get really excited about the different ways that people are making things. They're not making things with paint
Right.
necessarily.
Mhm.
And so that really intrigues me. Yeah, and I think, just keeping a kind of sort of steady work ethic, get in the studio when you can. Don't beat yourself up when you can't. Be okay with even just thinking about it, because that's what I do. Sometimes I feel like I make half of my work in my head while I'm in the
Right,
studio.
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Great advice. Thanks so much for taking time out of your precious studio time, your precious Sunday,
Yeah.
to chat today.
Yes. Well, thanks so much for inviting me, Alison. I really appreciate it. And yeah, and I hope folks enjoy it too.